Hello everyone, welcome to Excel Vba Programming course. I am your trainer Kazi and this is Excel 10 tutorial. In this lesson, we are going to take a look at the macro recorder, which is one of the most powerful feature available in Excel. The macro recorder actually allows us to generate VBA code automatically. What we do is we run the recorder and then we do regular Excel operation and we can enter values into cells, we can highlight them, we can color them, delete columns, delete rows, generate pivot tables, whatever you want, and the macro recorder observes our action and it translates those actions into valid VBA code. So you might be thinking, what's the point of learning VBA if the computer can automatically write it for us? Well, the macro recorder is functional but it's not good enough. So it should never be used for real macros. However, it's a really great resource for learning and exploring the syntax of VBA language, because whenever you don't know how to do something in VBA but you know how to do it in the main Excel interface, you can just run the recorder, execute the process, and then take a look at how it handles that procedure, how it generates that code. That code is not guaranteed to be perfect. It's actually going to have a lot of flaws and inefficiencies in it, but it's going to give you a foundation of understanding the general gist of Microsoft Excel, which is why the macro recorder is not just a tool for beginners, it also a tool that is used by professional developers as well. So it's a really great tool for understanding some of this foundation whenever you are diving into something new. So here is how we can record a macro. We are on the developer tab. Take a look at here, there is a button called record macro. If we click here, we are going to get a record macro pop-up box and there will be 4 options available for us here, and I will dive into each of them one by one. Let's get started. Click on record macro. See, this is the dialog box and we have 4 options here. First one, macro name. Second one, shortcut key. Third one, store macro in. And the fourth one is description. Let's start with the first one, macro name. This field is a mandatory field and here is where we want to assign our macro an actual name. Ideally that name should be descriptive. It should describe what the macro is doing. So the default naming scheme here, as you can see, is going to be macro 1, macro 2, macro 3, which doesn't really tell us what the macro or the procedure is doing. So a good name is descriptive. Usually starts with a verb. It can explain what we are going to be doing. In this lesson, what we are going to do is actually write our name into a cell and then do some formatting with it. So I'm going to call this macro write and format name. Now there are a couple of rules when it comes to macro name. The macro name must start with a letter. So here is, I'm starting with a capital W. Take a look at here, write and format name. It also cannot be longer than 256 characters. You should really never need that many because you want the names to be sweet and simple. And also you cannot use space in a macro name. So notice what I have done here is something called the camel case formatting. The camel case formatting is where you capitalize the first letter of each word. So we can't have space. So how we distinguish one word to another? We just simply capitalize the first letter of each word, and that's called camel case formatting, and that's what a lot of VBA developers use due to the constraint of not being able to use space. The next thing we have here is the shortcut key. Now we can always run a macro from the list, but there is always an option to create a shortcut key for that macro. But there is a big problem here. Many of the keyboard shortcut in Excel just involve control plus some kind of letter which is already taken. For example, Control plus S is for save, Control plus B is for bold. So if we put a regular letter here, it's very likely that we are going to overwrite one of those existing keyboard shortcuts. Now that's not going to break Excel. It's only limited to this workbook. So if you open any other workbook, those keyboard shortcuts will work just fine. But you should never really want to override those shortcuts because they're really important part of Excel and most of us use them. So we never really want to replace an existing shortcut. So we want to have some kind of solution here where we are guaranteed not to override something that has already taken by Excel. So we can do that by using shift in our keyboard shortcut. So if we do control plus shift plus some kind of letter, those combinations are not taken by. For example, let's say I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut control plus shift plus W and I know it's not going to be taken. What I can do here is just click into this box, click here, and now hold shift and press W. Take a look at here. The keyboard shortcut is control plus shift plus W, and this is going to be our keyboard shortcut when this macro is recorded. The next next option we have here is where we are going to store our map. And if you click here, we have three options: this workbook, new workbook, and personal macro work. And we are going to be using the default one, this workbook. So if we click this workbook, this macro will be limited to this workbook only. This option here, new workbook, if we click here, our code is going to store at a new workbook. When we finish recording, it will automatically create a new workbook for us and record our macro in that workbook. And the third option is here is the personal macro workbook. The personal macro workbook is a hidden file that is open whenever you open Excel. Whenever any files open in Excel, Excel load this personal macro workbook. So whenever you want to use a macro across every workbook, whenever you have some kind of functionality that is common, for example, you may want to have a common styling across all your workbooks, you can store that macro in a personal macro workbook. Then it will be available no matter what workbook you are in. It's kind of exists in the global space. The global space is where you can rely on it from any workbook. We don't need to do that here because this code is really going to be strictly limited to this lesson, so we don't need to make it global and available for everyone. I'm just going to stick with this workbook for now. Now the option 1, the macro name, is mandatory, and the option 3, the macro location, is mandatory. By the way, the shortcut key and the last option, description, is not mandatory, it's optional. And in this final option, the description bar, we can add the explanation of what this macro is doing. This is really helpful if someone else is going to be taking a look at the macro code later. They can see a brief comment or a brief discussion about what it's doing. So right here, I'm just going to write what this macro is going to do. We're going to be writing our name to cell A1 and then just formatting it with a couple of static flourishes. So I'm going to write the description, write name to cell A1 and formatting it. Alright, now here is what we have to be really careful, because as soon as I click OK, this macro is going to be recorded, and that means anything we do in this workbook, anything, whether we move from one cell, if we bold something, if we delete something, any kind of operation, all those steps are going to be recorded. The macro recorder, sort of like a video camera that is watching everything we are going to do and then replaying it whenever we run the macro again. So we have to be very careful, because if we make some kind of mistake, the recorder has no clue that it's a mistake. It thinks it's just a regular action. So we have to be very careful and make sure that we are executing the steps in the proper order and doing everything correctly as soon as we press OK. So let's get started, and I'm going to click OK. Now the macro is recording, and there is two ways we know that it's recording. The first thing is here, you can see at the top here, it says stop recording. And if we click here, the macro will stop recording. And the second point here is down below, a square box like a stop button. It's also a stop button for macro recording. And if we hover here, you can see a pop-up, a macro is currently recording, click to stop recording. So right now I haven't done anything, but if I do anything at this point, it's going to constitute the code in our macro. So here is what I want to do. First thing I want to do is click into cell A1, and then I'm going to write my name. Then I'm going to press Ctrl plus Enter. So if I press Ctrl plus Enter, that's going to allow us to enter that value but stay in the exact same cell. So it's not going to move down. So right now, let's go ahead and add some styling to it. I'm going to bold this cell. I can do that by pressing Ctrl plus B, and the name is bold. And now I'm going to change the font. Let's get back to the home tab here and change the font to Arial, and now change the font size to 24. And now let's add a background. Just click here and the background is added. Okay, let's just say this is our favorite format, and this is how we like our name to appear on every Excel page. So we're recording the macro. Let's call it a day. So let's go to the developer tab and click on stop recording, and that's it. Our macro is now recorded. Developer tab, and stop recording. So you can see our macro has stopped recording and is already generated a code in the background. Now we don't actually see the code yet, but we are going to explore it in a few minutes. But all of those steps we have recorded and we can now replay them from the beginning. So let's go back to a blank spreadsheet. What I'm going to do is just delete this column A, and let's say this is our blank sheet, and I'm just going to click on a random cell just to see if it works. Now the first way we can run our macro is from the macros from here. And when we explore this option in the previous lesson, it was actually empty. So if you missed the previous lesson, you can find it here. But now if we click here, we can see our macro name and it is selected in blue. So we can click this run button and that's going to execute the macro. So it's going to do all the steps we did from the beginning. So when I click run, there you go. This is exactly where we finished recording our macro. All those steps have been executed instantly. By the way, you can access this macro box that we just saw by using a keyboard shortcut, which is Alt plus F8. See, it's just a little bit of a quicker way to get there. Alright, now let's try to activate this macro with the keyboard shortcut we assigned. So once again, I'm going to delete this. Click on a random cell. I think you should remember our keyboard shortcut was Ctrl Shift W, and I'm going to press Ctrl Shift and W. See, once again our macro ran and we are back where we ended up. Alright, now the time has come to actually take a look at the VBA code. By all means, don't feel like you have to understand everything that's going on, but it's a good idea to take a look at what we just generated and see how VBA processed all our actions. So there are two ways that we can get our code. The first is just clicking the Visual Basic icon, which is here, and open the Visual Basic editor. I'll get there in a second. And then if we go to the macros right here and we select our macros, which is already selected, and click edit, and it will eventually take us back to the Visual Basic editor. So this is our Visual Basic editor. This might be our very first introduction to VBE. So if this is your first time seeing this, congratulations. This is a totally separate program from Microsoft Excel, and this is where all our macro code is actually being stored. And this is where the actual macro recorder has placed all its automatically generated code. So let me go ahead and expand this so we can see it a little bit. Now you can see the whole bunch of keyword and syntax that you are unfamiliar with. Don't worry, we are going to dive it later throughout the course. Every single thing is going to be explored in much greater detail. But let me just go through and offer you a bird's eye view of what's going on here. We are creating a macro here, or a procedure called write and formatting name. Take a look at here, write and format name. And right here, this is what we call comment, which are just lines that are ignored by VBA whenever it's running this procedure, and this procedure of course are run from top to bottom. So one line is executed at a time and it just proceeds from top to the very bottom one. These lines are ignored because they are comment, and you'll notice that this is where our actual description is going to be listed. We had written our description, which was write name to cell A1 and formatting it, and this is placed right here. And our keyboard shortcut, which we created at the beginning, and that is also is written here. So if a new VBA developer is looking at our code, they can identify how they can actually run this macro with their keyboard. So let's take a look at what we are doing here. Again, very briefly, not in-depth dive, just a bird eye view. Now take a look at here. We are selecting a range. We are beginning at the cell A1, and now take a look at here. We had written the name and we bold the name, and this too has already written here. And then we select the font, and here we select the font to Arial, font size to 24. Take a look at here. First one, there is a whole bunch of code that we didn't do. Okay, we just changed the font and then we didn't strike through it. We didn't shadow it. So Excel is understanding. So whatever we do in the main Excel file, Excel interprets this in two ways, in negative and positive way. So if we think about the positive one, what we did write our name, which is here. We did bold the name, and that's also true. and we change the font name to Arial, that's true, but it also interprets the action in negative way that we didn't strike through that name, we didn't shadow that name, we didn't underline that name. So like I said before, macro recorder is a beautiful tool, but it's always prone to error. It added this whole bunch of code which was not needed. And again, you take a look at here, it selected the font and it changes the size to 24, and then again it said that we didn't strike through that cell, we didn't shadow that cell, etc. So in this part we just change the font size to 24, and in this part we change the font to Arial and we bold our name. We didn't really care about the shadow or the strike through, but VBA recorded the state of that cell at the time, so it included all this unnecessary extra data in the macro. It's still functional, we just saw that and properly did everything that we wanted to do, but it also recording a whole bunch of extra stuff that we don't need. That's what I meant when I talk about it. The macro recorder tends to be inefficient. So finally, right here we are changing the background to yellow. Now, if you take a look at from top to bottom, there is more likely to 10 or 20 lines of extra code that we didn't want, but still the macro recorder recorded it. So you can use this generated code to kind of train yourself to explore different parts of syntax and different things and kind of picking up piece by piece depending on how the macro recorder does it. So again, just because the macro recorder is often criticized and made fun of by the VBA community doesn't mean it's a weak tool. It's a really great and powerful tool. It's just a learning tool. That's the point. It's a foundation for understanding how something might work in VBA, but you shouldn't use it to actually make your final macro, because as we can see here, it tends to be inefficient. That's all there is to cover in this lesson. I will see you in the next one, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.